Good afternoon, my student Marcos. I am happy you are very, very attentive. I'm happy you have come this morning. Please just pay attention. For we started this topic, I think this was our last topic before we went to this Corona break. So we have to continue trying to know what the Cold War is all about. And to take it all over, we have been made to understand by history that the Cold War started from 1945. That is immediately after the Second World War came to an end and ended in 1989. That's about 44 years difference. What is interesting here is for us to know a war. How can a war be cold? Because when I was in my days, when the teacher started this lesson, this topic, I begin to ask myself that, but is there any war that is cold? And now I begin to understand that actually it was a cold war. Because there's a cold war between a difference between a cold war and a hot war. A hot war is the war that involves an all-out and actual fighting. When actual fighting is done, that is a hot war. But, or conversely, a cold war is quite a different issue. Now, the name Cold War is used to describe the hostility that ensued or that followed after the Second World War between the Eastern Bloc led by Russia and the Western Bloc led by the United States of America. Because when the Second World War came to an end, there were two superpowers that emerged. From the West, the United States of America, and from the East, Russia. So this Cold War was actually between these two superpowers. Now, you see, like I said, it was a hostility that developed between the East and the West right up to the 1980s. It was a war of propaganda. It means words, a fight with words, fighting with words, propaganda. This one is saying this against this one, and things like that. It was a war of words. Equally, it was a war of ideology. Idea. This word ideology comes from this word idea. The ideas were different. The capitalist West were democratically inclined, and they were of capitalist economy. And the eastern part of Europe was communist, was a communist system of government, which is actually different from the capitalist system of government. While the western part of government, the western areas practice democratic government, the eastern part led by Russia had nothing to do with democracy. Democracy simply existed in the word of mouth, but the actual implementation of democracy was far-fetched. So it was a one-party system. So it was a war conducted against an enemy by every means possible, but without actual fighting. That is what the Cold War is. A war conducted by enemies against another enemy, using every other weapon, verbal weapon, but actual fighting was far from it. That is why it has been coined. It was coined the Cold War. Now, why did the USA and USS alliance, why did it begin to break down? Why? These are people who brought their forces together and fought Germany during the Second World War. But why all of a sudden they become enemy after the war? So it will be interesting for us to begin to look at those things. These people were good friends. They ate together. They fought a common enemy. But as soon as the war came to an end, they became enemies. Let us look at the reasons. Historians, political scientists, and history teachers, lecturers, professors came up with these facts to explain why their relationship broke down all of a sudden. Now we have one, a removal of a common enemy. A removal of a common enemy. enemy in the first place? Who was that enemy that was an enemy to the west and at the same time an enemy to the east? That actually called for concern, that they have to put their forces together to eject or to wipe this enemy out of the map of Europe. That enemy was Germany. Germany had been a threat not only to Europe but the world at large. From the days of the First World War, Germany, right up to the Second World War, Germany. So Germany became a nuisance. It became a thorn to the flesh of the West and to the East. And let me remind you again, that we saw last time, that when Adolf Hitler came to power, because they talk of Germany during the Second World War, they are referring to one man, Adolf Hitler, who came to power in 1933 and took the power of a chancellor and the power of a king. The Germans called a king a Führer. He became a king and he became a chancellor and created a dictatorship. So his coming to power signaled warnings to Russia because he said he must destroy communism in the East. And then he equally signaled warning to the French and the Allied forces and most of the League of Nations who maltreated Germany and asked them to pay huge sum of money as reparation for damages in the First World War. So the coming to power of Adolf Hitler signaled danger in Europe. That was why these two ends had to put their forces together to wipe out this danger that is coming to disturb their economies. So at the end of the war, Germany was defeated and Germany was a common enemy. So as soon as a common enemy has been defeated, they did not see any reason again why they have to become friends because of suspicion. We started some years ago, around 1914 to 1917. Suspicion has been there since. So a common enemy has been destroyed. So they saw no reason. They went back to their traditional side where this person was suspecting this one was suspecting this. So the common enemy has been removed on the scene. So they saw no reason to become or to continue their friendship. The second point now has to do with ideological differences. Like I said before, in the introductory part of this lesson, I told you that the West was a democracy and is still a democracy, whereas the East, led by Russia, is communist. And communism and capitalism do not have anything to share in common. That is very clear. So their ideologies differ, even though they were superpowers. They cannot come together for a common cause to build their economies as one people because of differences in their ideologies. The West part was capitalist inclined and practicing democracy, whereas the eastern part of Europe, dominated by Russia, was a communist government with always one party rule, which is against the norms of democracy. So the Western powers did not see any reason, and they did not like the communist system, so they did not see any reason to come together as common partners or as friends. Thirdly, the USSR and the world affairs. On the top of USSR, we know what USSR is all about. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republic and the world affairs. Now, what is the meaning of this? You see, after the war, it became very clear that Russia as a superpower will be involved in discussions that will have to talk about how the world will look like as the common enemy has been defeated. And this was what the Western power did not like, to include Russia in their discussions because of that communism. To the West, communism was like a stigma. They didn't want to hear about communism. So now that the war has ended and Russia is a superpower, it became very clear that nothing could be done in Europe politically. Nothing could be done in Europe for the interest of the general world, that Russia will not take a seat on the discussion table. So with this Russian coming into the world scene, it became a very big threat. So everything was done, everything possible was done by the Western powers to shift Russia far from this discussion table. And Russia came to know this, and that was why it widened the rift between the two blocks. It widened the rift because in most cases, like before the war came to an end, America during this period had manufactured atomic bomb. but Russia was never informed about it. And mostly when Harry Truman came to power as the next president of Russia, he took a hard line. He took a very hard line over communist Russia. He wanted to show it very clear that communism should be out of the scene. So when America decided to drop the bomb on Japan, Russia was not informed as an ally during the Second World War, because dropping the bomb in Japan was going to make Japan to surrender unconditionally. So at least as ally during this war period, Russia ought to have been informed that America will have to attack Japan, but Russia was not informed. So the use of the atomic bomb. So we shall be looking at the next point, the history of hostility. This is the next point to explain to us why the gap between the East and the West widened, the history of hostility. Like I said, that this hatred between the communists and the capitalists did not start at the war period. It started way back between 1940, when the First World War was still going on. It started way back that there was this hostility between the two powers. You know, Germany had been attacking and doing things in Europe, pushing toward the eastern part of Europe, toward Russia. But the Western powers did nothing to contain or to check German aggression. So Russia was very sure that the Western powers allowing Germany to start attacking colonies coming toward the east means indirectly that they are using Germany as a buffer zone against communist infiltration into the West. That was why they could not stop German aggression, as was agreed at the treaty at the Paris Peace Conference. So as they allowed Germany attacking Austria, attacking the Sudetenland, attacking Czechoslovakia, and finally Poland, Russia was very sure that it was a deliberate attempt by the Western powers to push Germany towards attacking Russia and to destroy communism, because that was one of the objectives of Adolf Hitler, that communism must be destroyed and the Treaty of Versailles have to be corrected. So this heightened the tension. They were hostile against each other, and that was true, because instead of checking German aggression, Britain and France resorted to the policy of appeasement, appeasing their aggressors, and by so doing you made the aggressors to have much power. And Germany was one of the aggressors, just like Mussolini of Italy and General Toto of Japan. These are three aggressors whose activities finally plunged the world into the Second World War. So this hostility has been there. This suspicion has been there. This spy, each other is spying on each other to see the level of artillery development, to see how far my enemy has developed, to see if my enemy attack me, are they going to defeat me? So this issue of propaganda, this issue of suspicion, this issue of spying, culminating to making the Cold War to take a fever height, as we saw it, mostly when the Cold War transcends European borders and went to other part, because the Cold War was a European issue. But finally we saw the Cold War leaving Europe and going to other parts of the world. That's between the 1950s and the 1960s. When I talk about this, I'm barely referring to the Korean War. I'm taking you to Korea War. I'm even taking you to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and even to Vietnam, where the Cold War now finally took a different direction, meaning the Cold War became a worldwide issue instead of a localized war to be in Europe and maybe Central and Eastern Europe. So that is it. Then the next point has to do with the Yalta and the Potsdam conferences. The Yalta and the Potsdam conferences. Yalta and the Potsdam conferences. Now, these two conferences are very, very important as far as the relationship between the East and the West was concerned. These Yalta and Potsdam conferences were very, very important. Now, Yalta is a town in Ukraine, where the first conference was held, and I think that was July 1945. Immediately after the war, this conference was held to decide on many issues concerning the defeat of Germany and her allies what will be done unto Germany and the defeated countries regarding the war and the consequence of the war. Then, after the Yalta conference, there was the Potsdam conference, which took place in February. It took place in February, and this conference, Potsdam is a town, an area, a suburb in Germany, where the second conference took place. So, with these two conferences, there was a lot of agreement and disagreement. Lots of agreement and disagreement, and this disagreement widened the gap between the two blocks, because they decided in Yalta for what will be done to defeat Germany, given the fact that Germany caused the war and plunged mankind into a catastrophic disaster. They agreed on many issues. One, they agreed that when the war ends, Germany will be divided into 4 zones of occupation, and each of the 4, that is Britain, France, Russia, and the USA, they will occupy their respective zones. And then even Berlin, the capital of Germany, too, will be divided and be occupied by these allied forces for a period of 15 years. Free and fair elections to be conducted to these countries, mostly the countries in Eastern Europe that were under Nazi control, under the German control, that there will be free and fair elections, and that the resources of those countries will be used to develop those countries. All of these things were accepted. But the implementations of this, the outcome of these 2 meetings, were never respected by Russia. Russia finally forced communist government in these countries. When I talk about these countries in the eastern part of Europe, I mean countries like Romania, I mean Czechoslovakia, I mean countries like Bulgaria, and Lithuania, and even the countries around the eastern part of Russia, like Latvia, like Estonia, and Estonia, and Lithuania. All of these countries had communist government that had been put in place by Russia. But this was not an agreement at the Yalta and the Potsdam conferences. So, given this fact, it became very clear that something was wrong and need to be corrected. It became very clear. And the Western powers were not very happy with this Russian stand. No free and fair elections in these Eastern European countries, as was agreed upon during these 2 conferences. Now, what about Poland? What to be done with Poland? It was agreed that free and fair elections should be conducted in Poland, and the Polish boundary in the west will get right up to the river Odessa river. The Polish boundary will have to shift because Germany has taken part of Poland. So it was agreed that at the end, the Polish boundary will shift to the west, taking back what Germany had already seized. When I talk about the Polish corridor. You know about the Polish corridor. I told you, Marcos, about the Polish corridor. And then, to Russia, as Polish territories will increase or will have to increase to the west, Russia also wanted to increase Russian territory from the east to the western part of Russia, that is, enter into Poland. But that was not an idea. That was not what was agreed upon during these 2 conferences. So, given these circumstances, it was very clear that the Cold War was actually going on and very, very rife. Now, that is it. We shall be looking at the issues to be addressed at Yalta and Potsdam conferences. Those issues to be addressed at Yalta and Potsdam conferences. We have already seen the Yalta conference and now the Potsdam conference. Those issues. The Potsdam conference, like I said, was a repetition of the issues discussed at Yalta. It was mainly a repetition of these issues that were not moving, that seemed to be very, very confusing in Yalta. So the Potsdam conference was just a continuation. So I told you that Potsdam is in Germany. The conference took place on the 2nd of February 1945. And those who attended this Potsdam conference, the Yalta conference, by the time they got to Potsdam conference, many things changed. The leaders changed. Because in Yalta, 4 countries attended this Yalta conference. There was France, there was Russia, there was America, and there was Britain. But when they got to Yalta, the personalities of this conference changed. In America, Truman won in the elections, and this American president, Roosevelt was ousted from power. So Truman attended the conference. That was when Truman came to the scene. Truman came to the scene and became a hardliner, very tough for Stalin's liking. Then we equally have Churchill. Churchill too was replaced, and then the only person that kept appearing in the scene was Russia, was Stalin. Stalin became the oldest among these people because of what? No democracy. Elections are never free and fair. Unlike in the Western part where you see people coming to the scene, political leaders coming, president coming to the scene because the elections were free and fair, changing the head of states as it was the case. But Russia, Stalin always appeared on the scene because of the press censorship and no freedom of press, and everything was under one man rule. So, in our next class, we shall deal mostly with the Potsdam Conference and see how this Potsdam Conference in its entirety, how it actually contributed to widen the gap between the East and the West. So my dear students, I think with that we have to wrap up this lecture for today, but before then, we'll have to give you a summary of what is happening. You should know what the Cold War was all about. It started in 1945 actually started officially in 1945 and went up to 1989 as was announced. This was when Germany became a unified Germany again after its division with Konrad Adenauer who came to the scene. Then the Cold War, what was it? Actually, it was a word that was described, that was used to describe the problem, the friction between the East, Russia, and the West, America. That's two powers until 1980s when it came to an end. It was a war of propaganda. That's what? A war of ideology, ideas, different ideas. Spy, to look, to check. We send people to go and spy information, intelligences, and suspicion, to suspect that this man is making friend to this man. America is making friend to Germany. It may be it is because they are diverting Germany to attention to attacking Russia. America too became suspicious of Russia, mostly when Russia could not support when Russia supported Japanese attack on the American islands in the Pacific. I mean the Marshall and the Carolina Islands. So it widened the gap. That was a Cold War. Now, the other issue I discussed here was what actually happened that the alliance between the West and the East started breaking down just after the end of the Second World War. I talked of removal of the common enemy, Germany. I talked of ideological differences, that's communism and capitalism. I talked of USSR and world affairs, Russia, Stalin making his appearances in world affairs, sitting on the same table with the enemies. I talked of history of hostility, and I finally talked about the Yalta and the Potsdam conferences, which were held to decide the fate of Europe, mostly when Germany and her allies will be defeated. So I think from there, unless there's any other question, we have come to the end of our lectures. And please read, because I need to give you a question in our next class. I will entreat you go and read so that you'll be abreast of the material, so that at the end of our next lesson, I will give you a question to answer to be submitted here at the school gate with the gate man for corrections and for your grading. So I thank you, Marcos, for being there. I thank you for your effort, and I equally thank you for making your research and assisting me as well. So have a better day. Bye-bye.